Fabulous. Such a great representation, Rosa and Hortensia, people from all over the state, from all walks, folks that are from early pre-K through post-secondary. There's pre-service teachers that registered, as well as every district and charter. Everybody's represented here today. So this is an exciting event for our amazing leaders at the Department of Education in Delaware. Look at that. Oh, beautiful, Michael. That's beautiful. Wonderful. All right. Great. Okay, as we get started here. Wonderful, everybody. So we are very, very happy to welcome you today to this amazing opportunity to hear from experts in the field. I'll just do a brief introduction for Rosa and Hortensia, who are visiting us today from across the U.S. We have a couple of different states represented here, now 3 in the room. And give of course, a shout out to Lynn Fulton, who is a dynamic and amazing leader in the work around dual immersion in the state of Delaware. So I'll just quickly introduce Rosa and then hand it over to them as they begin their talk during the session today. So Rosa Molina is here. She is the executive director of the Association of Two-Way Dual Immersion, ATDLE education, providing technical assistance, professional development, deep learning, really, truly, and honestly, a nationwide expert in this field that's so vitally important and so important as part of this conference. And as we listen to the work that they bring, particularly around two-way bilingual dual immersion and dual language programs throughout the United States. Rosa has worked with school districts, charter programs, IHEs, that's Institutes of Higher Education, to promote the development and expansion of this amazing educational approach throughout not only the US, but also thinking nationally about bilingual immersion conferences, how they get the word out, how they can support once people become interested in this work, and how that support is deepened and connected to the high quality instructional learning that needs to happen in order to make this program thrive. She has been working for 30 years as an educator in the Bay Area, Bay Area, and throughout in San Jose and Ravenswood school districts. She's built her expertise as a bilingual teacher, a reading resource teacher, staff developer, principal, director of elementary education and bilingual programs, and assistant superintendent of curriculum and instruction. She's a speaker, a writer, a professional, and a wonderful friend. So I hand it over to you, Rosa.
Oh, thank you so much. I am so excited to be here with you. Certainly, Lynn Fulton and I have had many times where we've had a little coffee together where we've talked about these programs and have done a lot of, have had a lot of interactions about possibilities, right? About the possibilities and the vision of dual language in Delaware. And she has taken it to a very different level. And so I'm very, very proud to have been invited, or pleased to have been invited to be here with you. I am going to share my screen and move right into this. Let's see here. Let me go right into this piece here. So with me today, I want to set up the agenda, and I just want you to know that I'm going to review just a little bit of two-way and dual language program components as part of what we refer to as transformational pedagogy. I want to talk to you a little bit about the national and state implementation patterns, and then the philosophical underpinnings of two-way and dual language education. And it's all predicated on the research findings. And so for some of you, this may seem like an overview. For others, this is foundational work. But for all of us involved in this, it's a reminder that the programs are research-based, that should be implemented with fidelity, and that if we're going to move forward in this effort toward biliteracy or multiliteracy for our communities, that we have to be students of this effort, that we really have to know the pedagogy, and we have to know how to implement with a tremendous amount of commitment to this effort. So with me, I'm very, very proud to introduce you to Hortensia Piña, who is our new assistant director. She joined the ATDLE team this spring. And Hortensia, if you could just kind of let us know a little bit of your background in terms of two-way immersion, that would be most helpful.
Awesome. Well, I'm so happy to be here and accompanying Rosa in this presentation. And just a little bit about me and my background. I worked in a dual language program in El Paso, with Isleta ISD. Started a dual language program where our program was an 80-10-10. There was 80% Spanish, 10% English, and 10% third language, which they had a choice of Chinese, Japanese, German, or Russian, and worked in that program several years, and moved up in the ranks to where I was dual language coordinator for the school district, with our goal being that every single school, all 62 campuses, offered dual language. And so I did that for several years, and then moved over to working with Thinking Maps for 15 years. And now I'm back where I belong, where I started, back in the dual language. So I am very happy to be here and continue this work. So, and especially with Rosa, it's like amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for being my wing person today, Hortensia, and thank you to all of you for giving us this time to talk about our favorite subject, which is two-way and dual language programs. So know that when we started in the 70s and we started these programs, that we basically were very few programs across the country. What's beautiful about your efforts in Delaware is that you're surrounded by some of the oldest programs in the country at Oyster Elementary School, Key Elementary School, and now Claremont in Arlington, the Amigos Project that was up in Boston, and of course the very famous Coral Gables program down in Florida. And those are the programs that when we started to implement two-way and dual language programs in California, that we came to study, that we really spent some time thinking about what our outcomes could be, how we could move our quote unquote bilingual programs into biliteracy programs. And the oldest programs in the country were on the East Coast, and we're basically engaged in this work for a long period of time. So, but over the course of the last 10 years, we have this decade where there's incredible interest in language learning. And it's really due to our world becoming smaller, the economic concerns and the political realities, where it really does require our graduates to be fluent in more than one language. It also requires us to understand that our society has become increasingly diverse, and that that our students, our researchers, our policymakers, our educators are examining very closely the advantages of second language, foreign language, world language, whatever it is that we're naming it, study, and what it does for not only for our brain, but what it does for us in terms of our society. So when we started our programs, as I mentioned to you before, we were 5 programs in California. We were another 5 on the East Coast. We started in the early 80s. And this map now outlines all the programs across the state, because now in our listservs, both from Cal and ATDLE, where we've been conducting mapping studies, we're finding about 1,200 programs across the United States, and all of these blue states are engaged in dual language efforts, not to the magnitude of Delaware and Utah, that have probably close to 80% of the school districts engaged in formal second language study opportunities for their students. But they are all actually engaged in working to ensure that that more and more students begin their schooling as part of a biliteracy effort. The state of Washington is exploring a statewide mandate as well to ensure that all districts in the state of Washington also implement two-way and dual language immersion. This particular map, the gray states are basically have issues in terms of implementation because they have English first laws. And in implementing English first laws, the programs really struggle with the inclusion of students who are native speakers into the programs, and therefore have a very hard time implementing what we would refer to as two-way immersion programs. But we're working on them, we're working on them. And every year we add another state onto this map. Now, since we were early implementers of this model, we really started to see the surge of programs. And this is from the Center of Applied Linguistics, and a map that we started to see where we really started to note the incredible influx of programs across the country, from the first 3 or 4 programs to over 1,200 programs in the United States. But we also know that we have had to really educate our forces. We've had to educate our networks and our districts about the importance of world language study. And for us to understand that we have this incredible potential for students to not only develop high proficiency in English, but also by adding a second language to their repertoire of skills, they're able then to expand not only their academic program, but also their worldview. There's a great article that came out from a student in China who talked about learning Chinese, of course, as their state language, and studying English, but boy, learning Spanish gave them the wow. And I think that was the name of the article. Learning Spanish was the wow. And what they felt was that they could speak to people from at least 40% of the world by just learning those 3 languages: Chinese, English, and Spanish. So there's a lot to be gained from understanding how many speakers of the language we have throughout the country, throughout the world, and to understand that what we're doing is very challenging work, but very noble work as we prepare our students with 21st century skills. What's very important for our information too, for our iteration, is that to understand that 95% of the two-way and dual language programs across the country are Spanish English. Although we've seen this incredible surge of interest in the Mandarin English programs. In California, we have Korean English programs that are in place where we have Korean speakers who are also engaged in the development, second generation Korean speakers, and who are engaged in the development of their literacy in Korean while they're learning English. We have Japanese English programs across the country now. We have Russian English programs, especially in Alaska and in the state of Washington and Oregon. We have Arabic English programs and German English programs that are and other languages that Portuguese English, for example, is coming up now too, that are now starting to be fully developed in their communities. But I think one of the things that's very important for us is to understand that Spanish is a world language, and that when we work with the Spanish language, especially in California, that oftentimes people perceive Spanish as the language of, as an inferior language, as the language of the poor, when in fact it's a world language, and that many people are very much engaged in learning. And so part of the work that we do in the implementation of dual language immersion programs is to raise the status of the languages that we're teaching. And very, very important for us to understand that that's a critical part of implementing this program correctly, is making the language, the second language or the target language, and especially the Spanish language, the prize for the community and for the students. So that requires us to really think about this and develop this mindset about additive educational opportunities for kids, and how learning the second language, especially in a two-way effort, is an additive process, that students get to keep their language and learn one more, and that no one has to compromise their mother tongue in order to be engaged in this work. That calls for that people have to have a clear understanding that English speakers are not giving English to learn a second language, and that target language speakers are not giving up their mother tongue to learn the English language. So everyone gets to keep their language and learn one more. And I think what's important for us is to continue to promote that and to develop a narrative around the importance of second language learning, whether you're bilingual or monolingual. We have different stories that we can tell our community about the benefits of bilingualism, or the lack of opportunity that we had to develop our own bilingualism. So we know that this is an important component for all of you to develop, and that is that narrative. And as a leader in this effort, as a principal, I know that I had to stand in front of my community and convince them to move forward. And you can imagine in the early 80s, we didn't have other programs. We were the first implementers of these programs, and we had to really market our programs to a community and convince them that this was the way to go, that this would benefit their children in the long run. And it was very, very challenging for all of us. And yet we moved forward. So after 35 years of implementation, I want to share with you 5 important lessons that we learned, and how we were able to transform our communities and ensure that our students were fully engaged in the implementation of these models over the course of their K-12 program. So the first lesson was that the two-way and dual language programs require fidelity to the research-based program elements. And there are program elements. We're not making this up as we go. There are guiding, the programs are very carefully engineered, and they're research-based. And I always like the analogy of an airplane, so that we have put together program designs that need to be clearly understood, so that in the middle of implementation, we're not changing the wingspan, and we're not moving the motor to the back, but that in fact we're implementing with great intentionality, with great understanding of the design, because we have these outcomes in the forefront of our work, and that is biliteracy for all children who are part of the program. It's also important for us that we understand that our programs are not deficit programs, that we're not compensating for students that come in as second language learners. We are not engaged in any type of compensatory education, that our programs have to really be designed to promote and accelerate the learning of students in both languages. But the traditional bilingual programs that were formed in the 70s were very deficit minded. And what we ended up finding out is that these programs, the so-called bilingual programs, were transitional in nature, and they were designed to accelerate the learning of English. And the outcomes were basically language replacement, that students would actually enter the upper grades, the intermediate grade levels, fully proficient in English, but with little or rudimentary levels of their first language, and the continuance of their language being interrupted. So language replacement was the goal, and what it ended up creating was what we refer to as subtractive bilingualism, because biliteracy is very difficult to sustain unless you have formal language arts program, a formal language arts program in the target language in place, kinder through 8th grade. We figured out that additive bilingual programs, that the mindset for additive bilingual programs where every child gets to keep their language and learn one more actually was sustainable. And we had to learn this, and especially in the early years of implementation, because we held our breath. We wondered if our students were going to be able to be fully literate in two languages. And over time and over careful study, we realized that we could achieve these goals of biliteracy. And in Hortensia School, the multilingual school in Alicia Chacon in El Paso, not only could they develop their literacy in two language, but we realized that they could develop their literacy in three languages if they were given the time and the structure with which to really learn all three languages. So our goal is bilingualism for all, and I add to this statement because it's not only bilingualism that we're after. It's not only the ability to speak the language that we're after, but our ability to be literate in the language is the one that most escaped us over the course of the last 40 years. We have plenty of people. And I would look at my own family as an example, where my father was a pianist and a radio station host, and my mother was a legal and medical translator. And yet, when we were raised, we were all very bilingual, but lack of schooling in the language doesn't make us literate. And so it became very apparent to my parents that they had to really work on our literacy in order to ensure this bilingualism and this biliteracy. They were very well-educated people, and so they were able to support that, but not all families can. And so schooling is all about literacy development. And I think that that's an important part for all of us to understand, that it isn't only being able to speak the language that we're after, but it's able to use those skills to read and write effectively as well. And it's that bilingualism and biliteracy combination that changes the brain, that produces students that we refer to as smarter students, right? So with smarter brains. So no student has to lose a language to learn a language is the mantra of our organization. We work to stave off the language loss for all students and this generation of children. And we work hard to make sure that when we're implementing these programs, that we're implementing them based on the best research that we have to ensure success for academic success and linguistic success for all of our students. So know that in the early years of implementation, our two-way programs in California on the East Coast were carefully researched for years before being scaled up. That's the huge advantage that Delaware has, because you have 20 to 30 years of research behind you as you're implementing these programs. So, but it's important for us to really realize that the new program development, the developers, the principals, the school district personnel have to study this research well, or you subject your program to the same issues that have plagued programs for English learners for so many years. And that is not fully understanding how a second language is taught, how second language learners engage in informal second language, and how English speakers need to be, how the programs need to be designed to ensure that English speakers also have success in these programs. So there's a lot of study to this. And I used to tell people as a principal, when I first took the helm as a principal, that I had to listen to this entire program overview about 15 times in order to develop my own capabilities and understanding of what these programs were. Because even though we were trained as bilingual teachers, we were engaged in bilingual transitional efforts. And in order to change the trajectory into biliteracy, it really took years and months of study. So I think that's important for all of us to understand that you need to study this, you need to understand the research, and you need to make decisions that are research-based. So the two-way dual language programs are considered the gold standard of bilingual programs and world language programs because we start early. We started at the elementary level. We start in kinder. Most of our students who are engaged in the program fall in one of three categories. They enter the programs as English speakers or bilingual students in the target language and in English, or they're target language speakers, or what we refer to as native speakers. So, but we know that combining the students and linguistically balancing our classrooms, especially two-way immersion classrooms, that students have peer models to work with. And that's why two-way is such an incredibly exciting design when you can incorporate that in your school district. The combination of native speakers of two languages where children are peer models of the language for each other helps students develop a native-like quality to their language. And because they're working with peers and they're doing correction and modeling for each other. And that's why they're referred to as two-way. Two-way because they have a teacher that's teaching them the language, but they also are working with peer language models in their classes. And that's what the two-way model is about. And that's different than a dual language one-way program where it's designed only for English speakers. But even that way, we know that these programs offer the very best program option for native speakers and English-only students, and that they're able to develop high levels of proficiency in both the target language and English. And this has been well researched for over 30 years. But we also are very familiar, and especially on the East Coast, you know, the Thomas and Collier data, and that English learners, you know, that we have been studying their achievement patterns for so many years. And so we know how to do this work, and we know what works and doesn't work. And we know that in the school districts, we have a variance of programs. We have ESL pullout programs. We have ESL through academic content programs. We have early exit bilingual education programs and traditional ESL. We have early exit bilingual education and content ESL. We have late exit programs, and we have the two-way bilingual immersion programs. And we know from kinder to second grade that they have very similar trajectories that mark the progress of our students. But we also know that over time, the trajectories differ dramatically. We know how to do this better. And I think that we have to pay attention to the fact that if we want our English learners who are engaged in these programs to be successful, that we either have to place them in late exit bilingual programs where children have truly become bilingual and biliterate, or two-way bilingual immersion programs in order to ensure their success. And Thomas and Wayne Thomas and Virginia Collier have marked the progress of English learners throughout the country, having done tremendous amount of work, not only on the East Coast, but in Texas, in the state of Washington, and Oregon. And they find the same levels of, the same outcomes from their particular work. And so if we know how to do this better, we need to do it better. And we need to implement the most successful programs for our students in order to ensure their academic success. The brain research has been so interesting over the course of the last decade. And certainly the Canadians have taken a tremendous interest in the bilingual brain and the neurocognitive advantages that occur in students who truly develop high levels of bilingual competence. And there's significant advantages to the bilingual brain with executive control processes, greater attention span, the control of the use of both languages, the monitoring, the metacognition skills that students develop, the ability to switch focus, and the ability of children to select relevant and irrelevant information to solve problems are just a few of the advantages that, that students who are studying a second language demonstrate. But there's a tremendous amount of interest in this work, and I really encourage you to look these people up and use that as part of your narrative, as part of your information to your communities. Talk a little bit about brain research and the bilingual brain and the incredible opportunities for us to create smarter kids. But I think that also I want to review with you that in this umbrella of dual language, that when we refer to dual language immersion, that we're really talking about 4 different types of programs. And so and under this umbrella, that dual language is really an umbrella term, that when we're working with the programs in Alaska, the UPIC program, or the Hawaiian programs, or the Navajo Nation programs, that we're referring to programs where there's a revitalization of the heritage language, and that we're recapturing the capabilities of all of the indigenous groups who are engaged in literacy in their first language and in English to be part of this incredible educational opportunity for their communities. We know that we have developmental bilingual programs that are in place and very much in the Southwest, especially Texas, where there isn't a real ethnic balance of students. And in fact, most of these programs are 100% Latino students, but who have different levels of proficiency based on the years that they've been in this country. So that a lot of developmental programs have both native speakers and bilingual kids and English fluent students, because Latino students engaged in two-way are not the same. It's not the same. They have very different experiences in the country. And Collier and Thomas's research on the developmental program show that if students are engaged in formal second language study in the very same way the two-way and the one-way students are, that they can develop high levels of proficiency, not only in Spanish and in English, but be academically successful as well. And so these programs are referred to as maintenance programs. Students are able to develop their academic program in English, but also in the target language of Spanish. And there are a host of developmental programs that are starting to take hold again in the Southwest. And then the two-way bilingual immersion programs that we started to implement in California in the mid 70s, early 80s. These are the programs where we combine native speakers of 2 languages, and with the goal being that we would have peer models of the language engaged in formal second language study as well. And then, of course, the one-way foreign language immersion programs that were designed for the Canadian children, the Anglophones, that they would say, for example, to learn French as a second language, or in Cincinnati public schools where students were all engaged in world language study. But they were programs that were designed for English-speaking children to learn a second language formally. And the common factor for all of these dual language program designs is that they all start in kinder and they move all the way into high school. So they're actually implemented through high school. And I think that that's an important piece for us to understand, that when you're referring to your dual language program, that you're clear about who your students are and who you're serving in the community. As we develop the goals of our programs, and there are 3: bilingualism and biliteracy for all children, high academic achievement, and the cross-cultural and pro-social skills that occur as a result of the students being engaged in this work, that we realize that this isn't hierarchical, that all of these goals have to build on each other, because it would be a huge flaw in our program for students to be engaged in formal second language study and go out into the world and not know how to use it in a social setting. and not know how to use it appropriately. We certainly found this with our 4th and 5th graders in those early years of implementation, that our students had to learn the informal and the formal. That when I was out in the playground with them as a principal, that children should not have been referring to me in the tú, tú, tírame esto, tú, but in fact referred to me in the formal, not because of who I was as an individual, but in terms of learning how to practice the informal and the formal. And so we've had to really teach our students the nuances of the language in order for them to truly develop their fluency in both languages, the opportunity to have exposure to the informal and the formal. In our models today, we have 90-10 programs, or what we refer to as full immersion programs, that exist across the country. Students develop their foundational skills in the target language first, and then they add on English fluency in 2nd and 3rd grade. And when I'm saying fluency, I mean literacy. And English only students gain foundational literacy skills in the target language, and heritage language speakers and English learners gain the status in the language by promoting literacy skills in their language first. And so you start to raise the status of the language and the status of the English learners in our classrooms. And that's particularly true in 90-10s. In the 50-50 model or partial immersion programs, the language provides the instruction is divided through equal amounts of time in both languages from the beginning of kinder, and that's moved all the way through the pathway. And the 50-50 model or the partial immersion programs have been in place for many, many years. And we'll talk a little bit further about what the connotation is of full versus partial immersion. But the bottom line is that the most successful two-way and dual language programs study and they plan all components of their program to ensure that the program is implemented with fidelity. Dr. Catherine Lindholm Leary is one of the premier researchers with over 40 years of dual language of studying programs, two-way immersion programs. And she found that in her work, that the results of her research and the results of our programs could be replicated in urban and rural programs with different language populations, regardless of socioeconomic status. And so she tied herself very closely to the implementation of the first programs in California, did careful cohort analysis for over 20 years. And as a result of her work, we've been able to take the model and replicate the model across the country with tremendous success. She's also the leading researcher for the guiding principles of dual language education. And if you don't have this guidebook, this needs to be part of your professional library. You can download it for free from the Center for Applied Linguistics. But it's important for you to have this because it not only helps you with the guidance of your program, but also to measure your program over time, because we know that every 5 years or so, you need to dipstick back into your program. How are we doing? How are the students doing? What's our implementation like? How's our parent engagement? What resources are we bringing to the program? All of those things are nicely outlined in this particular document, and it's really key for anyone who's involved in two-way and dual language education. But Catherine's research is basically outlines for us what we refer to as the salient features. Her research shows that our students will meet the goals of biliteracy if our programs are well implemented through the students' kinder through 8th grade pathway. And that it does take 7 to 9 years for us to show our students grade level or closing the academic gap, and it takes time. And so the greatest thing about two-way and dual language programs is that we do give the students the time to develop their proficiencies over the course of their K-8 experience. It's also important in her research that students have adequate exposure to the second language. And adequate exposure means that they have daily exposure to both languages, that we're not doing one day in Spanish and one day in English, or one day in Mandarin, one day in English, but that in fact students have daily exposure so that they develop the need to use the language on a daily basis. And we can't urge you enough to think about that need, because the need to use a second language is what will help children move from their first language and be motivated to engage in that second language. But they have to have a need to do so. And by developing a schedule and working with students who are speakers of that language, by combining the students together, students then develop that need to use the language, and to continue to engage in the language. There are also, these programs are not just what I used to tell my parents, this isn't the Sesame Street structure, right? It's not just a little bit of Spanish or a little bit of Mandarin or a little bit of Russian. This is formal study of a second language, and it's highly academic. It's based on a lot of our programs, a lot of our curriculum is based on program standards. And I think it's important for us to understand that our kids are going to develop the academic structure of the language as well as the conversational structure, what we used to refer to as the BICS and the KELP. The work that we are doing is to ensure that students are both conversant, and this is a communicative model of second language study, but that they're also academically capable so that we're meeting grade level standards for all students. We also engage in monolingual delivery in most programs in the United States. And monolingual delivery means that kinder through second grade, children have very separate language times so that they also then have a need to engage in the language. We don't translate curriculum for students, and we don't translate while we're instructing, and that we have this time in the target language and this specified time in the English language for formal instruction. As students become bilingual in 3rd through 8th grade, then this shifts a little bit as we really work on the development of metalinguistic transfer for students, that you know this in Spanish and this is the way it's said in English, or you know this in English and this is the way it's said in Mandarin. So that we're constantly working on language bridging for students, but at the very inception of second language study, the languages are kept separate so that in fact students have a need to continue to engage in it. And positive reciprocal instructional methodology is key, that students know that they've come into a classroom where language will be modeled for them, and that it's all very positive. It's a very positive experience for them. So that, the teachers are always responding to students with, I know what you are trying to say, and this is the way you say it, versus say this correctly or I can't hear you. You know, it's a very different way of really engaging students by being very positive and staying very reciprocal. This program is nothing without parents. The homeschool collaboration piece is very, very important. They have to be not only cheerleaders in this effort, but they have to support the school and the grade levels as the students move up the grade levels, understand what the grade level targets are, help at home as much as they can, continue to read to them in their mother tongue, and continue to support this effort and be on the sidelines, completely in complete support of the work that the students are doing. And then, as I mentioned before, the raising of the status of the target language will make this language and this community effort just incredible. And I know I lived it. I know I led this effort in my community. And I know that I will never have the same experience of community building that I had when we were starting our programs in San Jose and in the Bay Area. That the community building effort is unlike anything I was ever engaged in, because language brought us all together. The learning of a second language brought us all together and propelled us to move forward. And the program is absolutely critical on the power of our teachers and the power of our leadership. The quality of instructional personnel is one that just I can't speak enough to. That if we want a great program, we have to have great teachers, and we have to have leaders that are very committed to this effort. So the second lesson, and that was lesson number one, it's all combined, but lesson number two was that when we focus on the academic and linguistic advancement of the native speakers in the programs, that both groups of students benefit. This is particularly important in two-way bilingual immersion programs because the programs were designed from the research on Latino achievement and best practices in second language acquisition, and the development for students who were English learners. But students who were in two-way immersion were the students that in California. We brought this program to light based on the progress that we knew that we could achieve with our English learners. And over time, then, we had to really study the immersion methodology of how to include English-speaking students in the mix. So in the development of two-way immersion, we're really working on the research base that shows best practices on how to promote high academic achievement and high linguistic achievement for the native speakers of the program. And we found that when we did this well, that all students were very successful. And when we focused on the needs of just the English speakers, that we would end up really skewing the programs, and the native speakers would be left behind. So it's very important for all of us to come back to this research on native speakers, because when they're successful, everyone's successful, and will be more successful over the course of their K-8 experience. So that means that when we put the classes together, that we're linguistically balancing them so that students do have the peer models to work with, and that in two-way immersion, we're looking at about a third of our kids being English speakers, a third of our kids being bilinguals, and a third of our students being target language speakers. Hortensia and I were sharing that because of the border politics that have existed over the past, 5 to 10 years, that in California and the Southwest, we're seeing fewer and fewer target language speakers, and that our schools have had to really market our programs to our Latino and our target language families, because oftentimes they're under the misconception that the programs are designed only for English speakers. So we want to make sure that everyone understands that marketing never goes away, that the minute you stop marketing and the minute you stop outreach for the families, your program starts to really develop a very different type of profile. So this opportunity in two-way, especially to think deeply about your program makeup, I think is very, very important. Who are you serving? Who are the students in your community? How do you bring them into the mix? And then how do you speak to the families of the native speakers so that they see that they're a critical part of this effort? We also know that when we started, we were part of a study, especially in the Bay Area, a UC Berkeley study in the 90s, where they outlined the educational disparity between white student achievement and Latino student achievement. And we know that from that study that the research was clear that the disparity is not necessarily based on income level or family involvement or the educational backgrounds, but that race factors heavily on whether students are perceived as students, especially, and this has been especially difficult for monolingual English-speaking Latino students on the West Coast, and I would say across the country now. And we know that two-way bilingual immersion programs can give the students an advantage, can raise the status of not only the language for Latino students, but also for the community as a whole, because everyone is engaged in the second language effort and they want to be part of this work for their students. And when you're missing this key factor of peer models in the program, that you're not able to really fully achieved by literacy for all of your students. So this is a very important piece for all of us, and for us to understand that the race factors are deeply embedded in our practice, and it's important for us to really uncover those as we put these together. I know that we studied the work with Professor Gay on how to, really develop our capabilities through culturally responsive teaching. And I know Sonia Nieto was your keynote speaker yesterday and talks a lot about that, her work. She's dedicated her entire professional career on this culturally responsive opportunities that second language learning offers our students. The third lesson was this planning of the program as a K-12 with competent and knowledgeable teachers at all levels of the K-12 pathway. But that a lot of our work needs to be outlined from the very beginning. The most successful programs in the country have a dual language master plan. And in that master plan, you are developing your program development is articulated, it's written, and it'll survive any of the early implementers. There was one of my colleagues, again in El Paso, who used to say, build your program so that it takes 10 years to undo. And I've always kept that in the forefront. That would be Irma Trujillo Hortensia. And she would always tell us, you've got to build it and it has to survive you. And the only way that it'll survive you is if it's documented and board approved, board reviewed, and then put in place so that any new teacher that comes in receives a copy of the master plan. Any parents that are part of this can access the master plan. They know exactly what your plan of action is, K-12, and then people aren't making up the program, and we say, well, they're not making it up as they go. So that requires leadership, and I think that the master plan is part of that leadership, of putting a task force together to put it together. And usually the task forces are made up of teachers, school administrators, central office, representatives, maybe a school board member, the superintendent would charge the task force. And I think that what happens when you bring a task force together like this to put a master plan is that the knowledge base increases twofold, that the school district understands that a dual language program has to be incorporated into a district strategic plan, and that the policies are reviewed very carefully so it doesn't deter the students and the teachers from fully advancing the program through the grade levels. So I want to say just a little bit about our teachers, and I can't speak enough about our teachers and how absolutely this level of respect I have for our dual language teachers, and especially after this pandemic, and knowing exactly what our teachers had to experience to continue to forge ahead with the implementation of second language program, even virtually, right, done virtually, but that they're magnificent. And again, Todd Whitaker's words of if you want a great program, you have to have great teachers. I truly believe that our teachers have to be highly literate and proficient in the target language, because they're delivering the curriculum in 2 languages, and they have to stay focused on their grade level and understand their grade level curricular demands as well. So they have to understand their grade level, but they also have to know the language well enough to be able to deliver it deliver it well, and be motivating. This third bullet of they have to motivate and entice, encourage and model, promote, guide, reward, and celebrate the development of both languages for both groups of kids. It's just a really key factor. And our most magnificent teachers in the field are people that do this on a daily basis. They're great motivators. They're great celebrators of progress for their students in both languages, but they know the language well, and they can deliver it well in both the target language and in English. because the work is outcomes based, and the cross learning of language will take place when the teachers know how to manage their grade level, align their work with their teaching peers, and manage for instruction and conversation, and focus on the needs of the native speaker whose first language is both the target language and the language at risk. So when the teachers are able to really focus on the needs of the native speakers, then they're able to really successfully manage a two-way and a dual language effort at their schools. We also know that the programs must extend themselves through high school, that the programs must be fully developed through kinder through 8th grade, and now preschool. We're talking a lot about preschool programs being implemented and becoming part of this effort. But that in order for our students to truly develop grade level proficiency in both languages, that they need to have enough sufficient time to do that. When parents do not understand this, oftentimes they'll move into middle school and want a different experience. And in that experience, they're losing the benefits of a K-5 effort, because an interruption of a middle school, of a two-way program in middle school means that students aren't going to achieve a grade level capacity in order to be prepared to move into the world language world and the high school level. And by world language world, I mean that by the time our students are able to reach high school, they should be moving into advanced placement coursework and honors courses in Spanish or the target language. In Long Beach Unified School District, the 8th graders are given they're given the advanced placement exam as the placement exam for high school, with an 85% passing rate, with students passing at 4s and, with levels 4s and 5s. I mean, it's amazing. And when we first saw the outcomes of that, of the AP exam for 8th graders, we were able to see that we were surprised and very pleased that our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teachers were teaching grammar, they were teaching literature, they were teaching writing, and they had the students engaged in oral presentations. And when those 4 elements are in place for middle school, students successfully navigate into high school at the highest levels of program proficiencies. So the high school program is important for us. The high school team has to be sitting with the master plan in the master planning process, because we of course want to be able to have the high school schedule open enough to be able to put 9th graders into those AP courses or honors courses from the get-go. And never forgetting, the students have been engaged in formal second language study for over 9 years by the time they enter high school, and how different that is than high schoolers have had an hour of instruction in a second language for those 4 years. So it's a very different level of proficiency, and our students should be able to move into that level. So this K-12 pathway, thank you both for coming on. So that gives me a little hint there. This K-12 pathway is the pathway that ensures success for all of our students. This comes from Central Valley here in California, where they outlined for the parents on one piece of paper what the program would be. The elementary program, the middle school program, the high school program, the ability for our students to get the seal of biliteracy on their high school diplomas as they leave, and all the awards that are part of this when the students carefully navigate through this, so that we don't have loss of families after the elementary program, or we don't have students move into Spanish 1 after 9 years of study when they move into high school, but that in fact it's a very enriched and timeline for students over the course of their K-12 program. So Lynn knows that I could be doing this for 3 hours, right, Lynn? So thank you. And Melissa knows that now too. And so does Hortensia. So I could actually, there's just so much to say about all of this, but I hope that you can see that this work is transformational if we plan it, if we have a commitment to it, and if we engage our community in a clear understanding of what students can do, can achieve, both academically and linguistically, as part of this work. So
Rosa, thank you so very much to you and Hortensia for sharing all of this information. And just before I let Melissa kind of take back over, I did want to share with everyone that you are always more than welcome to contact me at the Department of Education about any questions any of our participants have about our dual language immersion initiative here in Delaware. Whether you're thinking about our two-way programs, we have 17 of those currently in the state, or our one-way programs. We actually have a lot of documents already built out. We have a K-12 trajectory. Our very first cohort of learners will be moving into 9th grade next year. And we already have coursework identified for them for college level courses in grades 10, 11, and 12 as they move through this 13-year pathway in the state. So thank you both so much, and for your national leadership, because without that, our programs certainly here in Delaware wouldn't be where they are today. So thank you.
No, you're so welcome. I just want to leave you with the contact information that if you have any questions about this presentation, that we will send you both pamphlets on multilingual, and we have our pamphlets that outline this entire presentation for you, and they're available to you for anyone who participated today just by we'll work with Melissa and we'll send them directly to you, but you can contact us at info@atdle.org with any of your questions as you move forward with this.
Amazing. I couldn't say enough. I was going to say the same, Lynn. You have just done so much work in the state of Delaware that this backs up so much of what you have already started, and the work that you've been doing. The brain research is amazing, and the research that we see coming out of bilingual biliteracy work is just it's just so powerful, and so it fits in perfectly with the message of this conference and the support for all the learners, multilingual learners in the state of Delaware. We're honored to have you. We're looking forward to that book, Rosa.
Okay. Yes. Oh, my book. Oh, yes. In a year.
It's coming. We're
coming.
going to be watching. I love it. We're very excited. We're so proud of you. And Hortensia, welcome. And just think it's wonderful that you've been here today. Thank you, everyone. Carrie and Maria, if you have anything to share, we'll thank you so much. And
just make sure to join us at 1 o'clock for Dr. Jessica Hazard. You can go to the Padlet to find the link for that. And I did drop the attendance link in the chat.
wonderful.
Thank you, everybody, for joining the session. We'll see you coming up at 1 o'clock.
Amazing.
Okay. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you. Beautiful notes coming in
Yes,
for all of you.
much.
Lots of thank
you.
Flipgrid and the Padlet, and share your learning.
That's great.
Yeah,
I'd love to see that too, Melissa.
I will. I promise. I'll send you
Okay.
the whole bit. It's going to be great.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you. We will
Thank
leave
you.
you.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.